Hello everyone, back again with movie and tune recap. Today, I'm going to explain an American supernatural horror film from 2021, titled A Haunting Savannah. Spoilers ahead, so watch out and take care. A Haunting in Savannah is based on a true story that happened to the Marks family in their home in Georgia, and the movie was shot in the actual house where the family experienced the haunting. Mark, the director of the film, along with other family members, recount their horrific experiences in the house. The movie begins with a family of four: Eric, his wife Rachel, and their two children, April and Andrew, moving into their new house in Savannah. They had relocated to start a new life after the tragic drowning of Andrew's twin sister, Alice, in a swimming pool at their old house. Upon arrival, Rachel and Andrew find the house astonishing, but April dislikes it and wants to return to their old home. Rachel noticed that the previous owners didn't complete the rooms upstairs, so Eric tells her she can design them however she likes. One day, while Rachel is unpacking, a ball suddenly falls from upstairs, which grabs her attention. She discovers that the ball fell from Alice's box, and as she goes through the box, she finds a doll, which she immediately throws in the waste bin. The next morning, after Eric has taken April and Andrew to school, Rachel, who is unpacking Andrew's items, comes across the doll again in his closet and hastily throws it outside. Eric, who works as a construction worker, heads to his workplace, where he meets his colleague, James. After learning that Eric recently moved in, James expresses relief that someone has finally occupied the house, revealing that it has been empty for as long as he can remember. One night, Rachel has a nightmare about Alice, standing in front of their former house, and she started screaming before Rachel wakes up. The next morning, Rachel goes to Andrew's room and discovers the doll in his bed, causing her to shout at him before throwing the doll outside again. She later apologized to Andrew for shouting at him, but he tells her she doesn't like the dark, leaving Rachel confused. Rachel has weekly visits with her psychiatrist, Dr. Livingston, where she shares the story of how they lost their daughter, Alice, and why they decides to move to Savannah. When Dr. Livingston asks how the family is coping with Alice's death, Rachel reveals they are doing better, and that night, the couple invites James and his wife, Vanessa, over for dinner. Vanessa's grandmother is believed to be a voodoo priestess who can see into the spirit world, which April finds a maze. Vanessa mentions that she can sense when an evil spirit is in the house, just like her grandmother, and suddenly, Andrew starts bleeding. Rachel treats him in the bathroom, and Andrew reveals she has made her angry. When Rachel asks who, Eric interrupts and carries Andrew away. After dinner, Vanessa tells Eric to stay away from the basement because she senses evil presence there, but Eric insists they don't have a basement. Vanessa tells James she doesn't want to come back to this house again, and as they depart, the ghost of Alice is seen from a window. Rachel has another nightmare, and this time she sees Andrew and Alice in their former house, looking possessed. The house begins to catch fire before she wakes up, and outside the house, a light is seen shining in Andrew's room. The next day, Eric and Rachel take Andrew to the park alone, after April, who is still angry, refused to go. In the park, Rachel and Andrew have a religious conversation, revealing that the family doesn't believe in prayers of God. Andrew says that when someone dies, their soul doesn't go to heaven but to a dark place, which Rachel insists is not true before Eric interrupts their conversation. At home, April is approached by a girl named Lilith, who tells her she lives nearby. Lilith seems attracted to the same gender and begins a romantic conversation with April, even taking off her clothes and touching her. April seems to be enjoying it, and their moment is interrupted when the rest of the family arrives home. Before leaving, Lilith kisses April. That night, while asleep, Rachel hears Alice calling her, telling her to wake up because bad things happen when she sleeps. The next morning, Vanessa visits Eric at his workplace, and shares what her grandmother told her about the house. She reveals that their house was built on an old plantation where slaves were burned alive during the Civil War and that there are evil forces in their home. Vanessa warns that they are not safe in the house before James tells her to go back home. Meanwhile, Rachel notices Andrew talking to someone under his bed cover, which turns out to be the doll. She scolds Andrew for taking the doll from the dustbin, and as she leaves with it, Andrew whispers, "You shouldn't have done that." Determined, Rachel dumps the doll in the dustbin and sets it on fire. Inside the house, Andrew is seen apologizing to something for his mother's actions, and an apparition of Alice emerges under the bed cover, with the light in Andrew's room going off. The next day, while Rachel is alone, strange activities begin happening around the house. Andrew's closet opens by itself, and heavy footsteps are heard coming from upstairs. Rachel heads upstairs to investigate and is suddenly startled when a vase falls on its own and breaks in the kitchen. She goes to the bathroom to calm herself, but as she leaves, her reflection remains in the mirror, smiling back at her. Rachel decides to visit her therapist, but on her way, her car breaks down, leaving her stranded. As she wonders what to do next, a local named William comes to her aid and offers to help with the car issue. After fixing the car, William tells Rachel not to listen to what folks say about this place, revealing that they tell lies. Confused and terrified by his words, Rachel tells William she has an appointment before driving off. During her therapy session, Rachel tells Dr. Livingston that she is grieving the loss of their daughter, and it seems no one else in the family acknowledges or shares this grief. Rachel blames herself for Alice's death, as she was the only one around when the incident happened and watched helplessly as Alice drowned. That night, Eric and Rachel head out for a movie night, leaving April and Andrew alone in the house. In her room, April receives a visit from Lilith, and they engage in a conversation about relationships. As Lilith makes romantic advances towards April, the moment is interrupted by Andrew, who demands April should come and read him a bedtime story. The teenagers retreat upstairs to seek privacy from Andrew's interruptions, and as they begin to make out, the camera pans to reveal the doll, which Rachel had previously burned, mysteriously present in the room. The next day, Rachel receives a creepy call where she hears Alice's voice telling her she shouldn't be sleeping because bad things happen when she sleeps, which terrifies her. Following this, she decides to place a recording device under Andrew's bed. Gradually losing her mind, Rachel sits in the living room, and the ghost of Alice is seen sitting next to her. That evening, she heads to Andrew's room to call him for breakfast but notice him emerging from the closet, and Andrew tells Rachel he is playing hide and seek, leaving her to wonder with whom. Rachel retrieves the recording device from under Andrew's bed and goes to her room to play it. She hears Andrew singing a lullaby and suddenly, Alice's voice joins in, singing along with Andrew. This all happened just before she came to call Andrew for dinner, and as she reversed the player again, it is only Andrew's voice she hears, and Alice's voice is nowhere to be found. At night, while everyone is asleep, Andrew walks out of his room, speaking to Alice, who leads him outside to the swimming pool. Andrew is instructed to jump, and as he starts to drown, he is rescued by Eric. Rachel scolds him for his actions, and Eric makes Andrew promise never to go outside at night before sending him to his room. Eric calms Rachel down and assures her he will put a lock on the front door to ensure Andrew's safety, which at least eases her worries. The following day, Rachel heads to Andrew's room to retrieve the recording device. This time, she hears Alice trying to turn Andrew against her, filling his head with lies that Rachel doesn't love him. Suddenly, Alice starts blaming Rachel for her death, causing Rachel to freak out and leave the room in tears. Rachel visits Dr. Livingston and reveals she hears voices and experiences strange activities in the house, and she thinks Alice's ghost is haunting her. She decides to play the recording for Dr. Livingston, but to her horror, Alice's voice is not heard, only Andrew's voice. Dr. Livingston suggests that it might be her mind playing tricks on her, and advises Rachel to create a special place for Alice and put her belongings there, thinking of it as a memorial to her life. Later that night, Andrew is awakened by Alice, who tells her he doesn't want to play and should leave him alone. He goes back to bed, and his closet door shuts closed. The following day, Rachel is visited by Josephine, Vanessa's grandmother, who has come to warn her about the house. Josephine shares the history of the house, explaining that it was a place where slaves were tortured to death, just as Vanessa had told Eric earlier. Rachel doesn't want to believe what Josephine is saying, as she reveals she doesn't believe in demons or religious stuff. Josephine tells her about the family who lived in the house over 150 years ago and how the fallen ones, demons, corrupted them, making them do unspeakable things to their slaves in the basement. Having had enough, Rachel tells Josephine to leave, and before she goes, Josephine warns Rachel that if she and her family don't leave in time, the fallen ones will change them too. At night, as April is sleeping, we see Lilith lying beside her, and on the other hand, Andrew decides to place a box in front of his closet to prevent whatever is inside from coming out. The next day, Lilith takes April to a cemetery in the woods behind their house, and despite feeling uneasy, April decides to follow Lilith. She tries to start a romantic moment in the cemetery with April, but April, feeling increasingly uncomfortable, decides to run off. It turns out to be the cemetery of the slaves who were tortured to death in the house's basement, and Lilith is trying to awake something. While Rachel is setting up Alice's room, her ghost is seen in the corner, and that night, Rachel, who is slowly becoming possessed, heads to Alice's room. We see her singing a lullaby to Alice, who appears alive and is sitting on her lap, but it turns out to be the doll. The next morning, Rachel decides to take April and Andrew to the park to spend some time with them. April leaves a voicemail for Lilith, apologizing for her actions the last time they met, and finally decides to tell her mother about Lilith. April confides in Rachel about her relationship with Lilith, but her words fall on deaf ears, as Rachel seems unconcerned. Rachel sees Andrew pushing a little girl into a lake, but when she rushed to save her, she can't find the girl and begins scolding Andrew. Back at the house, Eric is swimming in the pool when Lilith, who is naked, confronts him. She gets into the pool and tries to seduce him, even kissing him, but Eric resists and tells Lilith to leave. Shortly after, Eric received a call from a paramedic about his wife, and he arrives at the park. The paramedic explains that Rachel saw Andrew pushing a little girl into a lake, and despite witnesses around the lake, no one else saw the girl. The paramedics suspect Rachel to be under medication, but Eric reassures her that his wife is just under a lot of stress lately. As days go by, Rachel's behavior changes and she becomes more attached to the doll, which worries April. One day while having dinner, Eric receives a text and a photo of him and Lilith from an anonymous number. The anonymous person turns out to be Lilith, who threatens to send the photo to his wife if Eric fails to do what she says. Vanessa visits Eric at his workplace once again, and reveals she has been plagued by disturbing nightmares about his house. She insists that there is something sinister and dark in his basement, and questions why the previous owners left it incomplete. Eric stubbornly denies having a basement at all, dismissing Vanessa's concerns before James intervenes and asks her to leave. That night, under the influence of Alice's voice, Rachel heads towards Andrew's room with a knife. Eric intervenes just in time, and manages to break Rachel free from her possession before she can harm Andrew. Worried about Rachel's recent behavior, Eric visits Dr. Livingston to seek help. During their conversation, Dr. Livingston mentions the death of Alice, but Eric seems confused and claims not to know who he is talking about, and perplexed, Eric leaves the session. On his way home, Eric calls Vanessa to inquire further about why the previous owners left the house incomplete. Vanessa tells him a story about a family who lost their daughter when she drowned in a pool, similar to what happened to Alice. When Eric arrives home, he finds the house in complete darkness. He grabs a flashlight and begins searching for Andrew and April. Eric found Rachel in Alice's room, playing with the doll, and when he asked where the kids were, the possessed Rachel told him they were in the basement playing with their friends. Unable to bear Rachel's insanity any longer, Eric stumbled off to search for the basement. He found a door that opened to reveal a hidden area where he encountered a portrait of Lilith. Suddenly, he was startled by a girl's voice inviting him to come and play with her, before a possessed form of Alice startled him. Terrified, Eric ran out and encountered a group of people having a party in one of the rooms. It became clear to him that the house belonged to William and his daughter Lilith, and these individuals were descendants of those who had tortured slaves in the basement. They surrounded Eric and placed a sack over his head. After the sack was removed, Eric found himself outside the room with William laughing ominously. Frightened and confused, Eric rushed to Andrew's room, where he discovers bloody footprints leading to the closet. Eventually, Eric finds the entrance to the basement below the house and encounters the horrifying equipment used for torturing slaves. As he explores further, he hears a creepy voice and finds a well. Desperate to find his children, Eric calls out but receives no response. His attention is drawn to a locked box, which is shaking. Suspecting Andrew or April might be inside, he grabs a metal bar and tries to pry it open. In his struggle, a bloody and demonic vision of Lilith emerges from the dark well, taunting him with words. Just as Eric managed to open the box, he finds Alice inside. She warns him about the consequences of cheating on his wife, and in fear, Eric hastily closes the box and flees the basement. Eric attempted to escape from the house but encountered the doll blocking his way. Suddenly, a noose tightened around his neck and William pulled him back into the basement. The door slammed shut, and the light returned to the house. The camera shifted to Alice's room, revealing the possessed Rachel with Alice by her side, and as the camera moved away, Lilith now stood in Alice's place. 1 year later, Rachel is institutionalized in a mental institution, and Dr. Livingston asked her about the whereabouts of her children and Eric. Rachel remained silent, smiling without responding, and frustrated by her silence, Dr. Livingston left the hospital. The movie concluded with a haunting scene of Rachel rocking in her chair, leaving unanswered questions about the fate of Eric and the children. Okay guys, that's all the recap about A Haunting Savannah from 2021. Thanks for watching, see you again in the next video.